Greetings and welcome, I'm Ash, and these are my first impressions and analysis for Dark Souls 3. My initial plan was to finish Dark Souls 3 and then do a proper review, but after spending around 6 hours getting stabbed, chomped on and thrown off every scenic vista lockpick can provide, I've come to realize that I really need to share a bit of my enthusiasm or I might just burst. So here are my current thoughts on Dark Souls 3 from the perspective of someone that has spent far too much time playing the Souls series, as well as a brief analysis of the PC version and its technical qualities. For those of you that are purely interested in the analysis, you can skip to that point by pressing this. Ping! If you are worried that Dark Souls 3 might be going soft on its players given that it has become a gigantic franchise over the last few years, your concerns are thankfully unfounded, as Dark Souls 3 is the most brutal Souls games yet. Even the very beginning of the entire game, the 20-minute long tutorial area, contains 3 challenging fights that will mercilessly beat down even the most veteran of players. The first one of these you'll probably encounter is the big daddy of all crystal lizards, a veritable monstrosity that's filled with righteous rage for all the lizards that perish so that our swords may remain shiny. And unlike the ogres in Dark Souls 2, it's a lot harder to cheese this guy given his varied moveset. The same line of thinking applies to the first boss as well. He doesn't rip off his damn arm to club you with it, he grows a new one, which is a much more sensible option. While the first boss is a great introductory fight, it does have one rather annoying issue. The fact that you can't see diddly squat when he goes full-blown monster mode and covers the entire screen in shadowy snakes of doom. I eventually beat him by baiting out jump attacks, as everything else felt like doing combat in a tumble dryer, but I'm still not disappointed in the whole encounter, as it had an appropriate amount of oh shit moments that make for some great memories down the line. The third and final fight I want to highlight here is the one where you face off against a scrawny, homeless looking guy, and I'm not exaggerating here, even the in-game descriptions call him out on his looks. While he might look like a vagrant, his skill with Uchigatana is frightening, and he is apparently so buff that he can take 6 parries in a row and still somehow survive to slice me up to ribbons. Luckily, he doesn't have much poise, so through some very brave and constant tactical retreating, I've managed to whittle him down and receive the ultimate prize, a bunch of dirty rags. And also the Uchigatana itself, which never really was my style given that I prefer weapons with a bit more weight behind them, things such as the always excellent Murakumo. But getting a katana early in the game is always a nice thing, especially when Dark Souls 2 withheld one for like 7 hours. The best part of these challenges, if you conveniently ignore the mandatory boss, is that they are both optional and rewarding. It reminds me of all the times I ran to Havel in Dark Souls 1 on soul level 10 in order to get that sweet ring, only to get pounded into the ground over and over again. But it never bothered me, much like how it doesn't bother me in Dark Souls 3, because I know the effort is worth something, and that if I persevere for long enough, I would taste the sweet nectar of victory and the items that come with it. It also helps that the soundtrack is so inspiring and so memorable that it might just distract you from the fact that you spent the last 15 minutes dueling someone that doesn't wear pants. And losing. My favorite theme so far is the main menu one, which I've been listening to on loop for what feels like hours now. That thing can make scratching your back as you idly look around the room feel like a world-shattering event, which is an excellent excuse when you want to be lazy. Besides the music, which is very much Dark Souls with its booming orchestral sounds and a bunch of women softly yelling "Aaah!", everything else feels like an evolution of Bloodborne, from all the rundown hamlets and insane villagers you will run across to the combat mechanics which have been sped up significantly, but not significantly enough to remove the tactical aspects of Dark Souls 3. However, I've never played Bloodborne on account of not owning a PS4, so these observations come from someone that has only watched playthroughs, but it certainly does feel like From Software has decided to settle somewhere in between Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne for Dark Souls 3, which, as it turns out, was an excellent idea given that the combat so far has been absolutely thrilling. This might sound insignificant, but unlike the most other Souls games, Dark Souls 3 gives you the ability to choose from a variety of weapon types really early on, so I didn't have to wait for 5 hours like in Dark Souls 1 to finally get to the weapon types I liked, because they were locked away for reasons. In Dark Souls 3 you will get a whole bunch of mainly one-handed weapons early on, but as soon as you start leaving the first few zones, the massive two-handed swords and axes will start showing up, as the game knows you'll only at this point have enough strength or dexterity to actually wield them. It is such a simple little feature, but it's going to make my future playthroughs of Dark Souls 3 much more enjoyable, so consider me extremely pleased. The final thing I wanted to touch upon was the level design, which is far, far superior to the one found in Dark Souls 2, but still nowhere near the interconnectivity Dark Souls 1 offered. Don't get me wrong, Dark Souls 3 still features the same thrill of running around for 30 minutes only to find yourself returning to a previous bonfire via a shortcut you never even noticed, but its world isn't as connected as it was in Dark Souls 1. It's more of a linear series of large open-ended levels than a cohesive world, which is a shame. It's not bad by any stretch. I'd go even as far as to say that it's actually really good, but to see Dark Souls 3 improve upon nearly every aspect of Dark Souls 1 and 2, yet somehow not capture the same feeling of a realistic world as the first one is a bit of a conundrum. To its credit, however, the zones I've been through so far have been leagues above the ones found in previous games, with each one oozing its own particular brand of atmosphere. As a massive fan of the Undead Burg and other zones like it, I was thrilled to see that the high wall area is essentially that, just magnified a couple of times, and with even more bloody dogs that refuse to stand still. There's even a complimentary douchebag dragon perched on a bridge. To bring this piece to a close, allow me to say the biggest bit of praise one can say about a video game. Dark Souls 3 was fun. It's not often these days that I sit down to play a game and hours later realize the sun has gone down, I haven't done any work, and my friends are worried I might be dead. I'll have a full review up in a couple of days, but if what I've seen so far continues on to the very end, I think I can safely say that you should be very excited about Dark Souls 3. With all of that said, let's move on to the PC analysis. First things first, I'm using a combination of an Intel i5 CPU and an Nvidia GTX 970 with 4GB of memory. Or in other words, a fairly mid-ranged gaming PC that is still capable enough of producing some rather pretty pictures. It's also worth pointing out that I am by no means an expert in this field, that even though I believe I've covered everything you might be interested in, I may have skipped over some of the more obscure elements. In which case, I fully recommend you send me a message or just post down below and I'll make sure to check it out for you. With that said, let's hop through the options menu and see what exactly PC players will be able to mess around with, among a few other features I want to point out. Whether you want to play Dark Souls 3 on the PC with a controller or mouse and keyboard, you should be fine either way. Personally, I prefer the controller given I spent years playing the Souls series with it, but I had zero issues adapting to the mouse and keyboard loadout as soon as I rebound the keys, a feature that is thankfully supported. In other words, no matter what your input preference is, you'll only have yourself to blame once you accidentally roll off a cliff. These are your standard camera control options with two very important features you can adjust. Depending on how comfortable you are controlling the camera, I would recommend turning off auto wall recovery, as it will cause you more than a fair share of deaths given that the camera spazzes out in close quarters combat. It might feel a bit annoying to manually adjust the camera at first, but once you get used to it, you'll be able to have a much better grip on your character. The second feature deals with cinematic effects that occur when you're backstabbing enemies, parrying, and all that good stuff. I don't mind the screen being slightly busy and the camera zooming in a bit during these moments, but if this is something that bothers you, make sure to keep this option in mind. If you plan on PvPing or playing co-op with a friend, I have some great news, as the Dark Souls 3 network options are simply stellar. You can adjust whether you want to play with players outside of your region, US to Europe for example, set a password so you can only be matched up with your buddy for some jolly cooperation, limit summon sign visibility, and stop annoying people from talking. All of these options are self-explanatory, so I won't spend the time to talk about them, but believe me when I say they help a ton when it comes to meeting people that don't warp around constantly. As I mentioned previously, you are able to rebind every aspect of gameplay to your liking, both on the keyboard and the mouse. The PC keybinds in Dark Souls 3 are much more sensible than those found in Dark Souls 1, so odds are you won't even need to look into this menu. On the topic of mouse options, you'll be able to adjust the general sensitivity and invert both the X and Y axis if you truly want to play Dark Souls 3 on hard mode. And now, the most important menu if you're a PC gamer, the advanced graphical settings. As you can see, the settings are all fairly standard, and that is a very good thing because they are standard for a reason. By using the settings you see here, I've managed to mostly hang around 60 FPS when not recording, with the occasional drops to 40 in some of the less optimized areas. Interestingly enough, however, changing up the majority of these settings, both up and down, did very little for my FPS, which leads me to believe that Dark Souls 3's performance hinges heavily on the power of your CPU. While I can't tell you whether your CPU will be strong enough to run Dark Souls 3, I can tell you that I've only had FPS drops in around 5 areas so far, and all of those were of the look at the pretty scenery variety and not combat zones. As far as my suggestions go, I would advise you remove motion blur as it just makes fights a mess, and frankly, it looks ugly because all of the beautiful cape physics and dust effects that kick up when you dodge roll get covered by a blurry mess that's supposed to simulate speed. I am clearly not a fan, but you might be, so hooray for there being a slider. Next up, we're gonna cover stability, in-game experiences, and visuals. Let's start with the bad news. Much like Dark Souls 2, some gameplay features in Dark Souls 3 are linked to FPS, which means the better your rig, the worse off you will be. Thankfully, they are rather minor issues that are easily ignored. It's not related to weapon durability or something important this time around, but it's still worth mentioning as it really shouldn't be happening in this day and age. The biggest problem is when your FPS is near 60, as it's almost impossible to use a homeward bone to teleport out of a sticky situation without mashing the button like a Neanderthal. As the animation goes by so quickly, the game ends up being confused, and your character literally goes and nothing happens. It might sound silly now, but when you're stuck in a cave where the only exit is a homeward bone and the damn thing doesn't work, you might deduce that your character is bugged and simply try to delete it. Not that I would know anything about that. I've also heard rumors that fall damage is related to FPS, but despite my very best efforts to test this out, I haven't found a single shred of proof, so consider this myth busted. There is thankfully very little to talk about when it comes to stability, as I've had a grand total of 0 crashes, bugs, or even glitches with Dark Souls 3, which is quite impressive when you consider how big the game world is and all the ways you can interact with it. By abandoning the old console generation, Dark Souls 3 has managed to improve its visuals on every single front. Character models have more detail to them, textures have received a significant facelift and actually look like they belong in a modern game, and the lighting system from Dark Souls 2 is back with a vengeance. Out of all the elements I've mentioned, I would say that the lighting deserves the most praise as it feels both subtle and well integrated into the world itself, which is most easily noticeable at one of the numerous bonfires that lie nestled on top of cliffs and constantly bathe in the sun's glorious incandescence. As for the textures, they have been improved across the board, and very rarely will you find a wall or a rock within playable territory that looks like it was rejected from a PlayStation 1 game. The player armor, weaponry, and enemy models are about as well detailed and textured as you might imagine, with a special mention going towards the fiery effect that gets added when you chow down on an ember. Not everything is honky-dory, however, as those with a keen eye will notice that quite a few of the hidden background textures are of extremely poor quality. It is a necessary evil in order to keep performance up, but there are a few that are completely in your face with their ugliness, and it detracts from the otherwise beautiful vistas you get to enjoy. Still, it's a minor complaint in a game that is otherwise a visual treat. This will come as no surprise to anyone that's stuck around for the entirety of the video, but Dark Souls 3 doesn't just sport an excellent PC version, it is an excellent game in general. The menus allow you to control everything from visual fidelity to small quality of life changes, the performance holds up really well on a mid-ranged gaming PC, and most importantly, it manages to do all of that while still looking beautiful. There are some big issues and a few niggling little annoyances, but I have to say that I am more than pleased with Dark Souls 3 and I look forward to skipping dinner again as I continue on with my journey of self-flagellation via zombie dog. And that is it as far as this analysis goes. I'll have a full review up in a couple of days as soon as I can experience being thrown off every single vista Lothric can offer. Thank you guys for listening, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know, and if you would like to see more, you can either subscribe here, or you can check out the website linked down below. That one tends to be updated a bit more frequently. With all of that said, I hope you guys have a nice day, and I will see you soon with my Dark Souls 3 review. See ya!